Okay, does everybody hear me? Let's see if I got the kinks worked out. Hello. Okay, woo! All right. I was starting to wonder there. It was really giving me a fit, so I signed in as Forrest. So Forrest will be teaching this class tonight. You'll just be hearing Forrest disguise himself as Natty. Okay, I appreciate you guys sticking in there and having faith that I would show up. So, all right, so we're going to jump right into this. Seems like we've got everybody here. Everybody's hearing me. And okay. So if up to this point, we're going into week 4, we're at the halfway point, and we're on a good roll. We're going to start hitting some more difficult subjects here going forward. So I want to prepare you for that, and I've been saving those a little bit more difficult subjects till we got our, knocked the rust out of our brains and got thinking a little bit. Tonight we won't be hitting too much of a technical things, but I will just a little bit. So last week we were talking about repeaters, and what I told you about repeaters was that it simply just retransmits what it hears. However, it can't transmit and it can't receive a signal and transmit that signal at the same time on the same frequency. So it has to do it on different frequencies. It'll hear you on one frequency and it will transmit on another frequency. The difference between those two frequencies is called the offset. Now, when you can easily tune into its receive signal, you don't need any special settings. You can just simply go to any radio and dial in what that repeater's transmit frequency is to listen to what's transmitting on that frequency. The trick comes into play when you want to talk into the repeater. When you talk into the repeater, it requires really essentially 2 settings. One is that offset setting, because you want your radio to be able to hear on that one frequency that the repeater is transmitting out, and then you want the repeater to also hear you coming into it. But you need a tone to open up that repeater. So just a little bit of review. And as you can see here, what I have here is with the repeater. Say you have a repeater in your area, and its frequency that it puts out and that it transmits on is 146.055. Okay? This receive frequency. I'm sorry. The transmit frequency for the repeater is 655. God, I don't mean to confuse you guys. But if you were to tune your radio to just 146.655, you could hear everything that's going on that repeater. Everything that's coming out of that repeater, you would be able to hear it. But for this particular instance, if you wanted to talk into this repeater, so let's see here. Oh, come on now. So let's say this is, oh Lord, this is Bob. Oh, wow. You ever try to write with the mouse? I feel like I'm drunk right now. And this is Sam. Holy cow, this is, wow. Maybe if I drank, it would actually write better. Okay. So Bob wants to talk to Sam. If Sam is talking to somebody else, Bob would be able to hear Sam if he just tuned his radio 6.655. However, if he wants to talk to Sam and take part in the conversation, he's going to have to know two things. He has to set his transmit frequency to what the repeater's receive frequency is, and then he has to put in a tone of 100. That tone happens as soon as you key up. It's a microsecond burst of a tone. You don't even hear it, but the repeater hears it, and it opens it up and says, okay, I'm ready to talk. So if you don't have that tone in correctly, and say you put in 94.5, because you remember, let's go back for a second. Okay. I'd given you what I gave you here it is. So if you had it at 100, but say you accidentally set it at 97.4, the tone you are never going to be able to hear. You're never going to open that repeater up. So it has to be very precise. So that gives you a little bit of a review on repeaters. So again, to listen to what's going on to repeaters, you can just tune to the radio, to the station that it publicly puts out as it's broadcasting. So if you go, I'm going to put in the chat right now. I'm going to put in a website. Repeaterbook.com is a really good website to find out. When you go to that website, it will tell you, you go to North America, then you go to North Carolina, and then you narrow down to 2 meter, if that's the repeaters you want to listen to. And it'll tell you what its station it's transmitting at. Very easy. It'll give you the other settings that you need, but then you would have to know how to program your radio. Before everybody floods the gates with can you program my radio? We will be having a webinar towards the end of this class on a separate webinar, standalone webinar, and we will discuss on how to program using Chirp. It's a free software that you can download. Since 99% of CPN folks have a Baofeng, this software Chirp will enable you to program your radio any way you'd like. I'll just show you how to use Chirp, and you'll have to kind of put the pieces together yourself to program. So with that said, let's move on to this week's subjects that we'll be talking about. So which of the following describes the muting of the receiver audio controlled solely by the presence or absence of an RF signal? An RF is always going to stand for radio frequency. So Dave is asking, presumably, if you don't use a transmit offset and use the same transmit and receive frequency, you will cause repeater interference, correct? No. Because if you set your frequency, your transmit frequency, two things have to happen for that repeater to cooperate with you. You have to have the correct tone, and you have to have its correct receive frequency. Its receive frequency has to be your transmit frequency. Now, I know this gets a little confusing. It's real easy to kind of get those kind of switched up. So you just kind of have to take it slow a little bit, because even myself, I get a little confused sometimes. But in order to be able to talk into a repeater, you have to have the offset, which is the number of kilohertz that you're bringing that frequency up or down to another frequency that will be your transmit frequency, but will be the repeater's receive frequency. Once you have that correct, you have to have that tone in order to open that repeater up. A tone is kind of like knocking at a door. Nobody's going to know that you're standing on their front porch wanting in their house if you don't ever knock on the door. Well, the repeater's going to never know you want to talk unless it gets the proper tone and opens the door and says, come on in. And once you have that hard-coded set, when you key up, you're opening up the repeater. So, I mean, if you try to transmit at the same frequency as the repeater transmit, yes, you could cause interference. That is correct. But I would say that chances are, because that repeater is higher up than you and would have more power than you, that you're just going to become static to that repeater's signal. If you were to key up and the repeater were to start transmitting, chances are the repeater is going to be more powerful and is going to override your signal. And whoever you're talking to on simplex, let's just say you're talking on simplex, Dave, you're talking to Sam. You're talking on simplex, but you don't know that that simplex channel just so happens to be an area's repeater, its transmit frequency. So you and Sam are talking away. You're talking about, you're on simplex, radio to radio, remember? And you're talking about how, you know, Tom Brady screwed up that that pickle run and dropped a ball. So when that repeater kicks up, Sam is going to hear that repeater more than he's going to hear you. You're just going to bleed right into the background. So to answer your question, yes, because there's no proprietary, you don't have to have a tone. The radios don't have to have a tone to hear the repeater. They only need that tone to open the repeater. So if it transmits on a frequency, you got to remember, repeater's just like a radio, right? In fact, it's got two radios inside of it. Told you it has a radio that's programmed for receive or a radio program for transmit. You can make two Baofengs into a repeater. It just takes two radios and a small box in between called a duplexer, or you can affectionately call it a dispatcher. All right, cool. Jody says, if that happens, then how do you fix it so I can hear Bob? You would have to tell Bob to QSY, and we're going to cover that. QSY is a Q code. You can tell him, hey, Bob, go down 2. You know, just tell him to go to another frequency. A lot of times it's a friend that you talk to often on simplex. You both should have you should have at least 2 stations that you guys can talk on. That way, if the station that you're on you go to turn on your radio and somebody happens to be talking simplex on it as well, you can't kick them off of that frequency. You don't own it. So you and Bob should have a secondary frequency that you can go to. That if you don't hear each other on the primary, you just know, try the secondary real quick and put a call out to each other on that one. Okay, yeah. So how do you fix it? You just have to go down 1 or 2. And since the repeater's it's been there, it's an honest mistake. It's been there and it's going to continue to be there. You're not going to beat a repeater. So, and a lot more people are expecting to use that repeater than they're expecting to hear you. So it's kind of just go up or down 2 or 3 or however many you wish. But again, have secondary frequencies is always a good thing. So anyway, so which of the following describes the muting of a receiver audio controlled solely by the presence or absence of an RF signal? So most people that have ever heard of radio, especially in CB, I think we all are, grew up hearing a CB. We always knew truckers had them, and Daisy Duke talked to the Duke boys, and Boss Hogg listened in, and Cooter and Roscoe. Yeah, so we're all aware of what squelch is, I think, or we've heard the term squelch. Okay, so squelch is just a setting that you simply turn to cut out when there's no signal coming in. You want to cut out that what we call the white noise. I don't have any Black Lives Matter members in here, do I? Because it has to be white noise. It can't be any other color. So, but white noise, the you turn the squelch, you turn your squelch down, right? The downside of that is you have to turn your squelch just to where you cut that static out. If you turn it any more than that, a signal coming in might not be strong enough to break that squelch. And they may be calling you and your squelch is set too high and they're not able to break it. The signal isn't coming in clear enough to register to that squelch setting to open up your speaker. So we have two here called a tone squelch and we have a carrier squelch. The best way that you can remember this, the other two are not going to matter to you. Remember, CTCSS is just tone. Okay, that's all. It's just another term for tone. You have tone squelch and carrier squelch. Okay, so to remember these, the word carrier would be more in line with an RF signal. Think about what an RF signal does, right? What does a radio do? It carries an RF signal through the air, a radio frequency signal through the air. So that's the best way to remember that. Tone squelch, there really isn't a term there's not really a legitimate term called tone squelch. So there's just tone, okay? So really the A is kind of an invalid term. But the most basic carrier squelch circuit in your radio will silence background static when the repeater or simplex signal stops transmitting. Now, some radios have a knob on the top of them, handhelds, or on the face plate of them for the squelch. And if growing up, if you lived in the country, you knew somebody had a CB, the squelch knob was right there in front of you. However, a lot of your new radios have the squelch as a menu setting. So it's buried one or two deep. That's why it's good to know how to get to your menus in your radio. Okay. Now, there's two webinars that we have to have for most of CPN, and I understand that, and I'm putting my ducks in a row. Is one, we need to have a class on understanding the Baofeng radio, what the features are and what the menu items in it are. I do understand that, and that is coming. And then how to program the radio. Now, the reason why the class is coming first, because a lot of what I would talk about in programming your radio, or I would talk about in features of the radio, wouldn't make sense until you take this class. This class will really clear up a lot of the terminology when I start digging into the Baofeng radio. I had to think about that, Venus. Too funny. So we will get into that. It hasn't fallen on deaf ears. I'm just putting one cart in front of a horse. I'm putting my ducks in a row, and we are going to get to it. So have faith. We're just getting one thing at a time. But you have been heard. So with that said, some radios have these settings buried into the menu items. Some radios have one button. You push it, and it'll take you to that menu item, and you just simply turn a knob that serves as generally the Baofangs are this way. One button will get you into the menus, and and then you have an up and down menu that will take you through the menus. And then when you get into the menu item, the up and down will help you change the values. I don't want to get into that too much and distract you, but a lot of these are going to be menu driven in the current radios. When you start getting up into HF rigs, when you start getting into HF radios, those radios will have a squelch on them. So enough of that. But your Baofeng is going to have it buried in a menu item. It's kind of there's a comfort that you set it to, a comfort zone that you can set it to, and it generally always is going to be a comfortable setting. Rarely have I ever had to see anybody ever have to change the squelch setting on a Baofeng radio. So which of the following common problems might cause you to be able to hear but not access a repeater even when transmitting with the proper offset? Okay. So which of the following common problems? So let's go through these real quick. So the repeater may require an audio tone burst for access. Remember, it needs that tone. It may require a CTC-SS tone for access, and it may require a DCS tone sequence for access. Now, if you recall in our conversations last week, we used the term PL tone. Okay? PL tone. PL tone is an umbrella term that covers all these different types of tones. Okay? The most common tone that you're going to see in America is CTC-SS. Okay? In Europe, when you go to Europe, you're going to see more DCS tone sequence for access. And now there are some repeaters in the United States where you might see a DCS tone. And this all goes into programming your radio where you think you got everything right, and then you have to go in and double check. If your friend says, hey man, I'm hitting this repeater just fine, and you're not hitting it, and you go back and look in chirp settings, I got the right tone, I've got the right offset, so what could it be? Sometimes if you change the type of tone you have, it can help. I know this is like, hey, I'm just starting to learn what tone is, and now you're going to throw, there's different types of tones now? There is. But you only need to really be concerned when you're programming 95% of the repeater frequencies into your radio. You only need to worry about CTC-SS. That is probably 95% of the repeaters in North America. You have some specialized repeaters. So there's a system out there called System Fusion. Yaesu makes it. It enables you to talk on radio like you would Baofangs, but then it also talks digitally, and the signal quality is just better. The sound quality is better. You know, those you start getting into audio tone bursts. So to answer this question, all of these choices are correct, okay? The key to this is that all these answers have tone in them. These are legitimate types of tones, okay? And it says you not access a repeater even when transmitting with the proper offset. If you know for a fact you've got the right offset, and the way that you can tell if you got the right offset is your friend keys up and says, when he keys up, his little LED screen changes. He gives you that frequency that it changes to. You remember the up and down .6 that it can change? Anything above 147 goes up 0.6, and anything below 147 goes down 0.6. That is a general rule. It's not mandatory. There are, remember I said 147 goes up, 140 anything above 147 goes up. I have seen repeaters that are above 147 and the offset was actually down. Okay. And really be honest with you, a lot of times that is really the source of that is just the repeater owner just being a jackass more than anything. Every once in a while, there is a legitimate reason why there could be a repeater within 25, 30 miles that a 50-watt radio could hit either repeater, so the offset needs to go. You would think, well, just change the tone, and that's true. You could change the tone instead. But for whatever reason, the repeater owner gets to really choose what he wants to do. He just has to go to that. You remember that frequency coordinator we told you about? He just has to go to him and check in with him to make sure that what he prefers to use is okay. The frequency coordinator is not going to tell him and what he must use. He's just going to tell him if it's all right to use what he prefers, what he's asking to use. So, no more cornball funny jokes. So remember, the input frequency, you see right here, it goes up. Now, remember what I told you is that below 147, the repeater, the offset's supposed to go down. Here's an example where it goes up. Okay. So you're talking into it at .61. You have to have the right tone, and it's retransmitting out to 145.21. It's always a good idea to program a few of your most local repeaters into your new radio. You know, and the reason why is because, do you recall when you got your driver's license? Do you remember that tightening feeling that you found on the south end of your body when you first got on the interstate and the cars went zipping by you? When you went on that on-ramp, do you remember that time when you got on the on-ramp and you had to merge into traffic and that traffic is going 60, 70 miles an hour, that gut feeling you had? Well, the only way that you got comfortable with that is by doing it. Remember the first tall bridge you went over? And that road all of a sudden felt like it was 4 inches wide and you were riding on the rails? We've all been there. But once you did it, you did it better the second time and you got more and more comfortable. Radio's the same way. So it's so good to program some of your local repeaters, 1 or 2 in, when you pass your tests, and listen. Now remember I told you, you don't even have to program anything in just to listen to the repeater. So if you go to repeaterbook.com, you go down to the North Carolina 2-meter repeaters. They're listed by county. Go to one that's listed in your county and click on the link, or just tune. You don't even have to click on the link. Just tune to that frequency that it says for a repeater in your county. Just turn your knob, make your knob go to frequency instead of channel. The VFO button, you hit VFO and turn it to frequency instead of channel settings, and just dial to that frequency and listen. A lot of times you will hear traffic usually in the morning, usually about 7 to 9 a.m. And then you'll typically hear traffic from about 3 to 6 in the afternoon. And that's people coming home or going to work. Typically 1, 2 o'clock in the morning, you're not going to hear a frequency you're not going to hear a repeater very much. But you should always be able to hear that frequency if it's online and it's transmitting. It's just the tricky part is actually being able to transmit into its receive frequency. You remember, you have to have that all set in the tone to open it up. So what determines the amount of deviation of an FM as opposed to PM signal? Okay. This is where we're going to get, this is the part that I was here to tell you that was going to be just a little bit trickier this week. What we have is we have three different types of frequency, three different types of modulation that can happen to it when you're using your radio. Now, we've all been used to hearing AM and FM, okay? And those are two of the three. The third one is called phase modulation. You don't have to worry too much about phase modulation, and that's what they're referring to here when they say as opposed to PM, phase modulation. So when you hear FM and AM, what AM stands for, and I'm going to type it in the chat room, is amplitude modulation, and FM is frequency modulation. So the answer for this was the amplitude of the modulating signal. What determines the amount of deviation, okay? The thing about amplitude is what you can consider to be another word for, think of amplifier, okay? The word amp is in this word, okay? What happens if you turn an amp up too high and try to talk through it? It over deviates. It sounds, it's too loud. The voice is too overpowering, and it just sounds like murmuring. Everybody's been to a concert where the volume was just way too loud, and in between songs, the singer is talking. You can't hear a word he's saying because he's over deviating. He's over modulating. Okay. So an unmodulated RF carrier wave would just have flat lines on each side. Okay. However, as you start talking, the inflections in your voice in volume and in tone change the width of that carrier wave, okay? Here, the skinniest part, probably nothing's being said. But all radio frequency signals have a concept of ebb and flow, okay? You got to remember, a radio signal is comprised of two things: electricity, you have air, right? And magnetism. So when a signal is going through the air, as somebody is talking, like I would if I had this is what we call an oscilloscope, okay? If you remember, we talked about a couple weeks ago, we talked about VFO. I've used that term a few times. It's called variable frequency oscillator. I'm going to type that into the chat. Basically, VFO is short for tuning knob. Okay? But what's going on inside of you remember this oscillator? That's part of the word of VFO. This is a scope. This is a graph, a screen that has been graphed out to show what that oscilloscope is doing. Now, as people start talking, the louder they get, the higher pitch they are. Several things will affect it. This can tend to go outside of its boundaries, of its intended boundaries. And that's when you get over deviation that they're talking about in this question. What determines the amount of deviation of an FM signal? An unmodulated RF carrier requires narrow bandwidth. Okay? So to read you the term that they actually say for this, and I will read this out of the book that I recommended to you. Okay? How wide will your FM signal be on the air? That's determined by the amplitude, the height of your modulating signal. That is determined by the amplitude of your modulating signal, your voice. The amplitude of the modulating signal is determined by how strongly you are speaking into your transceiver, which will determine the amount of carrier deviation. Sounds complicated, but after a while, you'll discover that you need to close talk your radio microphone in order to get the proper amount of amplitude for your modulating signal. So a lot of times when you're talking, one of the quickest ways that us experienced veteran radio guys know of a newbie is when people talk too close to their mic. They put the radio up to their mouth, literally in the center of the speaker, and they talk right into it. And it just comes out so modulated, it's so overpowering. Remember, it's just like at a rock concert or country concert. And it just doesn't, we can't make intelligible sense of what's being said. So folks will simply tell you, hey, you're over deviating. Can you back off of your mic a couple of inches? Okay. What we tell folks is back off a little bit and turn the radio to the side, about 45-degree angle. Don't turn it directly into your face, a little bit off to the side. And hold it about 5 to 6 inches from your face and talk into it. You should never have a microphone touching your lips or even close to it. At minimum, take a fist. You know how it's really cold outside and you take your fist and you blow into your fist around your thumb and your forefinger into that little hole to warm up your hands? Use that as a good spacer, and then set the radio against the pinky side of your hand. Now pull that fist away, and you've got a decent reference guide until you get used to it. And a lot of times, if you talk to friends or you talk to somebody else who has a radio who knows you, that's where the practice comes in. The reason why you want to listen to repeaters but without transmitting is so that you can get the lingo, you can get the spacing, and you can get you get how they call each other. You hear how they incorporate that every 10 minutes and at the end of their conversation. Sometimes you will hear people use phonetic alphabet: Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, Echo, Foxtrot, Golf, Hotel, India, Juliet. You know, or they'll use Q codes. They'll say, somebody will say, well, how's my signal? Oh, well, you have a little QSL. And you're like, what? QRM, QSL, what? QA, huh? So you learn these things, and then when you hear that, you can go look it up real quick and say, oh, okay. So we're going to get to that in a couple of questions here about the Q codes and that phonetic alphabet. So I'm going to tie all that in really quick here. So just understand that if you talk too loud or talk too close to your microphone, you'll over deviate and it'll sound like the teacher in the Peanuts. Wah, 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 wah. Get it? The modulation of the carrier creates sidebands. These would be the highest points here would be the sidebands, okay? If somebody said upper sideband, they would only be talking about where my laser is pointed. Above that would be a single sideband. They would only get one side. This lower sideband would be this side here. You say, well, how would that work if you don't have the full signal coming? You do. You get the full signal. It's just not going to be as full. It's going to be a very flat voice, not a lot of audio quality to it. It's not going to sound like the DJ over Hot 105. It's going to be very flat and uncharacteristic. But because you're only putting out that sideband, it carries out a lot farther. The more signal that has to go out, the more work. Are sidebands only on FM, Dave? No. Sidebands can be in any signal. We have them in FM. We have them. You can have sideband on 2 meter, and you're allowed to use sideband. You're allowed to. There are instances. So we have what we call digital, where we can send text to each other, or data we can send to each other. And a lot of times, if a repeater's down or we want to get out farther, we can't use a repeater for digital signal. So we have to use simplex. And to get that digital signal out farther, we use the sideband portion of the signal. Now, your Baofeng doesn't have the capability of doing sideband. Usually your mobile rigs, your 50-watt mobile rigs. Donna sent me an email earlier. I was eating dinner and getting the final touches to the class, but I will respond to your email. I did see it, so I'm not ignoring you. But and in that email, you had shown me a couple of handhelds and a couple of mobile units. When I say mobile unit, I mean like the car stereo looking kind of radio that you mount in a vehicle. You can mount them in the house. I've got a couple in the house, but they're primarily meant to go in. They look like a car stereo kind of form factor. When I say mobile, when I say handheld, that's going to be your Baofeng style radio. So you're asking, what is the meaning of FM as opposed to PM? Frequency modulation as opposed to what does PM stand for? Okay. You got it. Dave, you're right on, man. You are absolutely right on. So PM is obviously phase modulation. I'm going to show a slide here in just a second here. So I'm going to skip your question for a minute and we're going to come right back to it. So what happens when the deviation of an FM transmitter is increased? Its signal occupies more bandwidth. Makes sense, right? I mean, the more signal you're putting out in your radio signal, a signal can be composed of many things. It can be, one is power. That's the foundation of your signal has to be the power that's putting it out. But how loud you're talking into it as well, right? I mean, you could have 1,000 watts, but if you're whispering in it, the guy that's got 50 watts and he's talking loudly, you're going to probably hear the guy with 50 watts. So it says its output power increases. No. That's a manual operation that you manually do to the radio. By you talking into it is not going to change the amount of power that's coming out of other factors, okay? And because of that B is wrong, C can't be right because it's saying it's output power and being here. So only one half of that is right, and they're saying and, not or. So you can knock those two out. Asymmetric modulation, they're just throwing you a curveball here. That is way outside the boundaries of a technician license. There is such thing as asymmetric, but we don't even talk about that in extra. So the only answer that it really can make sense at its most basic is that the signal occupies more bandwidth when the deviation is increased. So, unmodulated carrier, full power at all times, right? The waveform. So, we will get into next week. I'm going to break down a little bit more about what a wave is. Okay? Explain, a wave is a combination of time. There's distance involved. How long does it take for a signal to make a full revolution before it comes back to its starting point? Meaning it has to go up, it touch the top side, and touch the bottom side of the carrier signal. Okay, so this point right here in the middle to this point is an important concept, and we will get into that. Okay, so the modulated signal with frequency deviation and constant amplitude. So constant amplitude, they're telling you that there's a constant signal coming out. So like a steady hum. It's not increasing in volume, pitch, or anything. Just a hum. And what they're showing you is a modulated carrier with the frequency deviation. You can see with FM, it's how much of the signal gets compacted and then gets stretched out. Gets compacted, gets stretched out. Okay? So when this class, when we start winding down this class, I'm going to give you guys all these slides. I'll give you all these slides. I'm adding to them as we go. In fact, I tell you what, this week I will commit to sending you guys the slides that we have so far. I think we're at a halfway point. It's good that you get the slides up to this point, right? I keep going, and we're probably up to about 200 slides right now. So when this class is over with, we will finish up with these slides, and I will send them to you, and I will break them out. I'm going sequentially, where you notice this T2, B06, 05, 04. So I'm just simply going in sequential order, the order that's in your study guide, so that you can keep notes with the study guide. If you did not get this, if you didn't get the test pool questions, let me know in chat, and I will share the file in the chat so that you can get those. It's a good idea to print those out if you haven't already, and you can write your notes around it to what makes sense for you. Okay? So just remember, with AM, the height is affected. So we can see here, you see where with AM, depending on how loud you're talking and the nuances in your voice, typically you'll see this shoot up and get wider when when people say use a word with a P in it is in Paul. Think about it. P has a punch to it. So it's going to cause the signal to jump. T is another one. Those are two good letters. So if somebody says Tom Tom, it's going to jump. It's going to jump twice. If somebody said Pompeo, it's going to jump twice, right? So those are two letters that I can think of right off the bat that if a word had them in it, you would see. And then if somebody spoke loudly, if it was anybody listen to Mark Levine? If you listen to Mark Levine, you can just imagine what that radio signal wave looks like when he gets really amped up and screaming into the radio. Okay? With frequency modulation, do we see here where the signal is stretched out and then it compacts itself and then it stretches out and then it compacts itself? So phase modulation acts a lot like frequency modulation. A phase would be a direction. Think of phase as you would like direction. Okay? But I will tell you that you really don't have to worry so much about the term phase modulation, okay? This is thrown into the mix of this, and I should have kind of cut this out a little bit, but phase modulation is not a big test item. If it's mentioned at all. I don't believe it's mentioned at all. As far in terms of an answer, something that qualifies you needing to know what it is. The emphasis of what you need to know as a technician is all around AM and FM. What could cause your FM signal to interfere with stations on nearby frequencies? So your SWR too high? So the answer is A, obviously, but I'm going to explain. So SWR too high? Okay. And we're going to get into what SWRs are when we start getting into feed line and coax and safety and things like that. Sorry, I had to get a drink. What SWR is, real quick, it stands for standing wave ratio. So when a signal leaves a radio, that signal, remember, it's an electronic charge going up a metal wire that's wrapped around rubber or plastic. Okay? Different wire has different thicknesses. Some have a solid core wire down the middle, like your cable TV, RG58. Some of them have stranded centers, which is a multitude of smaller diameter wires bundled together. When that signal goes up that material, different feed lines act differently. Okay? When that signal reaches the end of that feed line, it needs to go out to an antenna. And that antenna, the length of its elements has to ring resonant with the frequency that is leaving the radio. So, have you ever noticed that the whole idea about putting a glass of water in front of a speaker, and if you turn it up or you use a high enough frequency, you'll shatter the glass, right? Or do you notice that if you set a glass on top of your home speaker and it only seems to vibrate with the bass sounds? So when a signal leaves the radio, you want as low SWRs as possible. And how you get that low SWRs is that antenna has to be resonant. I'm going to type that out, resonant, not resident, resonant. Okay? I put that in chat, resonant. And it has to provide a harmonic balance to the frequency leaving the radio to it leaving the antenna. When that frequency, that perfect balance becomes gets off kilter, and the frequency is either slightly above or below, the farther away that it gets away from that quote unquote balance, that signal gets reflected back into the radio because it's not able to leave the antenna. Not all of the frequency is leaving the antenna, so it comes back to the radio, and that signal creates heat. So we always want to keep our SWRs low, because heat is to all electronics is a danger. And the two ways you can get heat in a radio is not providing it enough power will create heat, and high SWRs. And the way that we get rid of SWRs is we use a tuner. And what a tuner does is it matches the impedance, the resistance. And so when you're sending that signal out of your radio, well, I know I'm confusing you guys, and it's just as clear as mud, and I hope you're hanging on. But when that signal is leaving that radio, the material that it travels along, including the antenna, has a certain amount of resistance to it that wants to keep that signal from leaving the radio. And there is a certain point where all the signal is going, as much as possible of the signal is going to leave the radio. You're never going to get 100% of the signal leaving the radio. It's just, it can't happen, because the materials used to transport that signal are kind of fighting it a little bit. It's just like if you took a cup of water and poured it into a sponge and then turned around and squeezed that sponge out, you're never going to get the same amount of water, right? Because that sponge is now moist and still retaining some of that water. And that what's being retained is getting pushed back into the radio as a signal and creating heat. Enough of that. So SWRs. Incorrect CSS tone. Remember, that only has to do with repeaters. Okay? And its only job is to open up the repeater. Nobody can hear it. So if nobody can hear it, remember I told you it was an inaudible tone. So if nobody can hear it, how can it interfere with nearby frequencies? So because just the fact that B is wrong will make D wrong, right? Because if B is wrong, then not all the choices are correct. So microphone gain is too high, causing over deviation. Which of the following applies when two stations transmitting on the same frequency interfere with each other? So Dave, this goes back to your question that you asked earlier. And Judy, you asked the same question. And it's great that you did, because here goes the answer. So common courtesy would prevail that no one has an absolute right to the frequencies, right? I mean, think about it. If I own a frequency, how do you own one? If you can't own one, how can I possibly own one? So none of us own the frequencies. Ham radio is completely based off of courtesy. We have professional courtesy towards each other, and whoever's there first stays. If we have a net, remember, a net is just a conversation happening, and we have it on a repeater, and there's a conversation going on in that repeater. You simply wait for a gap. You wait about, you get on there about 5 minutes beforehand, and you key up when you get an open repeater, and you say, give your call sign, and if you can remember the call sign of one of the two that are talking, call to them and tell them, we have a normally scheduled net happening in 5 minutes. We'd really appreciate if you guys would clear the frequency for us to have our net. And because it's professional courtesy that goes both ways, almost always the guy will say, okay, I'm going to wrap up here, give me another minute, and that'll give him time to tell his guy, hey, QSY, I'll explain the Q codes in a minute, QSY to frequency blah, 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 blah. Let's go over to the other repeater. As a ham radio person, you're going to know what your repeaters are in your area. at least the two most obtainable repeaters to your home, right? Because home is where you're more likely to use the radio the most. So that's an opportunity where you tell the person you're talking to, hey, let's go over to the other repeater, and we'll just talk on that one. So whoever has the strongest signal has priority. I guess in a capitalist society that might fly, but then if that were the case, don't you think we would spark off a power war, and we would have people with 1,500 watt amps, talking. It would seem to me that if we had a case of strongest signal wins out, Baofangs would be losing, right? They would just be they would always be on the losing end of things. So whoever has been on the frequency the longest has priority. Conversation about guns. The repeater owner got on there and just simply asked folks, hey, I kindly appreciate, I'm not telling you can't do it, but I'd kindly appreciate if you reduce the talk about guns so that it doesn't offend folks. Again, he can't make you stop talking about it but what can he do? He can also take his repeater offline, right? If he really wants to, but at the end of the day, the repeater owner doesn't have any greater privileges over that repeater. So the station which has the weakest signal has priority. Then it would seem to me it would be a battle either way, right? The strongest or the weakest signal. So the best way to tie this is just simply common courtesy, right? Just makes sense. Everything about ham radio is about common courtesy. Keep reconnecting. I have been dumped off 3 times tonight. After the 10th time came back for me. Yeah, I'm sorry, Steph. And Donna, I don't know what could be causing it. If more than one of you are getting dumped, if you guys live very close to each other, there could be a dip in your service and your bandwidth to your area. If you guys live very close to each other, I'm only guesstimating here. But if more than one of you are dropping, then it's not a localized problem, right? But I don't know what it would be. Just hang in there and hit up the replay if you need to. Okay, you guys don't live close to each other. I had a rough time signing in tonight. I don't know what was going on, but it was being a beast to me. And do you remember some of you saw that it had 0 attendees, but you clearly could see 5 or 6 of you talking to each other? So I'll put in a support ticket tonight and see what kind of answers I get. So back to the questions. Just common courtesy, right? Just common courtesy should prevail. I think that applies to everything in life, right? You don't go to a restaurant and talk to your waiter really rude because everybody knows what happens. Just be courtesy. Even if he's the worst waiter in town, the way that you figure that out is on the tip end, not while he's serving you your food. So common courtesy should prevail, and that's just everywhere in life. Which of the following methods is encouraged by the FCC when identifying your station when using phone? Remember, phone is voice, right? So on your test, they're going to when they refer to phone, they're talking about voice, microphone, talking. CW is what? Is Morse code, right? CW, continuous wave, Morse code. And data would be, CW falls into the data form of things, but data really, really would be considered when you're sending digital signals out through software, through a computer. So which of the following methods is encouraged? Use of phonetic alphabet. That was the case when we're in the military. That was the case everywhere when you're communicating. If you clearly can't communicate use phonetic alphabets. And the reason why is because, think about this, when on a radio, if you have just enough static, pat and bat sound an awful lot alike, right? And with enough static, the P and B, if I gave out my call sign and I said, you know, N4 DSM, so November 4 Delta Sierra Mike, how do you know I wasn't saying Mike for Papa Sierra Mike? Instead of the N, it was M. Instead of the D, it was P or B, right? So phonetically always is the way to go. And what I will tell you is, let me stop here just for a second. Is when it comes to connectivity issues, sometimes if you clear out your cache, if you restart your computer, that helps. I know that doesn't sound, I know that's a 5-minute solution instead of a 30-second solution, but restarting computer a lot of times will clear out your cache. But if you clear out your temporary files, sometimes your browser can get really mucked up if you've been on it for a while before you started the webinar. Not all the time, just giving some possible factors that could feed into it. So back to phonetic alphabet. What I will tell you is get accustomed to this alphabet. As a prepper, you should always be accustomed to this alphabet, because communicate as a prepper, you want to communicate in short, sweet, simple terms. KISS method, right? Keep it. So you want to be as efficient as possible with your communications. So it's good if you learn your phonetics early. Some of you might already know it. If anybody's been in the military, this definitely should come second nature to you or be a refresher, because I don't know if you could go through through any kind of contract in the military enlistment and not experience phonetic alphabet. Now, I will tell you, do not use, I hear people on the radio all the time, and it makes them look like an ass. And I purposely say ass, because they will sit there and they will say apple or applesauce. For B, they'll say biscuit. You know what I mean? And when people start getting creative with their words, the phonetic alphabet was created in such a way that it uses words that are not part of our everyday language. How many times a day do you say the word alpha? Or Dave, right? Pilots. Oh my gosh, pilots. Yeah, you live by it. You got to. But how many times a day do we say alpha, or do we say bravo? Unless we know somebody named Charlie or Mike or Victor. You know, these words were specifically created because they're not common words, but yet they're very clear on the radio. No matter how faint your signal is, you'll understand alpha, bravo. You might hear the ah and the o, but if you know somebody's attempting to do something phonetically, ah-o is probably bravo, right? So I would tell you, just don't get creative and try to stick to the phonetic alphabet. When you do this, you will get into a habit so that when you get into general, if you ever take your general test and you start venturing into HF communications, now you're doing with international, okay? And in international communications, phonetic alphabet is the way to go. I can say Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, and somebody in South America is going to understand that. It's universal. Okay? So, and again, this is part of the ITU standard, okay? Again, I place an emphasis on this because you know, like I had a guy one time, he used to tell everybody his name was Bill. Instead of saying Bravo India Lima Lima, he used to say, "Boy, I like ladies." And that was how he said it phonetically all the time. "Boy, I love ladies." And it's just aggravating because for most people you have to slow down. It may be only 5-6 seconds, but you're slowing down. Okay, boy, B, I love L, ladies L. You know what I mean? If you say applesauce, okay, that's A. That took you a second to remember that. Whereas if you use the same phonetics over and over again, alpha doesn't even, you just don't even think about it anymore. So, okay. That's right, Donna. Exactly. I mean, there are some doctors in the medical field. Doctors use it. You know, I mean, it just makes sense. It carries over through so many things that it's just ABC, Alpha Bravo Charlie, Delta. I mean, those are so universal, and they're used in when somebody is meaning to say something phonetically. Why just use the same thing that everybody uses? If you decide to be creative, I'll tell you, when I hear somebody on the radio and they on HF and they're saying they're something phonetically and they're saying alpha biscuit chalk, I don't even acknowledge them. I just overlook them. I turn the frequency. I just ignore them. Okay, you're going to be an ass. I just move on. I just ignore them. And a lot of radio operators feel that way. Like, I'm not even going to try at this. So, right. You never forget it, man. I mean, it's so very easy to remember them. You know, you want to know what's challenging, be in the military and have to learn semaphore. Us guys that have been on boats know what semaphore, using flags, and know what the different there are flags for S. There's a flag for R. There's there for Romeo. There's a Sierra flag, a Tango flag. Whenever you go to a ship and you see those lines going all the way up the top of the forecastle to the antennas, and it has all those little flags on them, they actually say something. Each one of those flags is a letter, and it actually says something. And if you've been in the Navy, you know that. Um, so, and if you work any deck operations on boats, ships, anything, you know, maritime, you really, that gets a little frustrating too. So, okay. Which Q signals indicate that you are receiving interference from other stations? So let's talk about these Q codes for a second. Okay, we got about 30 minutes left. I'm not going to keep you guys longer tonight. We're going to cut off right at 10. But so there are Q codes that we use in ham radio, and they stem from Morse code. Could you imagine if somebody was communicating with dit dot dit dot dit 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 dot dot dot? If they had to communicate, I am getting interference. Please go to frequency. What that would be like 2 minutes of right? So they came up with Q codes. So all the Morse code guys had to do for saying, I'm getting interference on this frequency, go to this other frequency. They could go QRM, QSY 14.250. Right? I mean, that's all they had to do. So the Q codes, and we've just adopted that into voice as well. We've adopted that into voice. and it works really well in ham radio. Again, as a prepper, Q codes are a good thing to remember. As a group, a CPN group, we should learn Q codes. That way, we can be short, sweet, and simple and say our Q code to make up for 5 or 6 words, okay? So the best way to remember when you're getting interference from other stations, okay, all these are qualified Q codes. The one that can throw you off, okay, is QRN as in Nancy or as in November, and M as in Mike. Both of these are interference Q codes. The difference is N is for natural, for lightning, electrical storm. No problem, David. Glad you can make it, buddy. So we talked a little bit about repeaters. We talked a little bit about, we're talking about Q codes right now. We went over phonetic alphabet. And what we're talking about right now is interference you're receiving from other stations. That's man-made, right? So QRM. If I told you Quebec Romeo November, Quebec Sierra Yankee 14.420, I'm telling you that I'm getting natural on my end on HF rig. You could be in Canada. You could be in, God help you if you're in Canada, but if you could be vacationing in Mexico and we're communicating, you have no idea that I've got a lightning storm on my end, or I've got one that's nearby and it's approaching my direction. So I tell you, Quebec Romeo November, QRN for natural. QSY is let's go to another frequency. If I sat there, it was another station, that's your Q right here, the other stations, meaning man-made, QRM. The best way I remember that is quickly remove man-made noise. QRM. Which Q signal indicates you are changing frequencies? Again, all of these are valid Q codes. But if somebody were saying, I want to change frequencies, what is the first thing you would ask? Why? Why are we changing frequencies? And that's a good way to remember QSY. Because the first thing you're probably going to ask when changing a frequency, or ask yourself, why are we changing frequency? Oh, there's interference. There's QRM. So, and let's go over these just real quick. So sometimes you will hear QRP. QRP is a practice of ham radio that people use low power. So if any of you guys have read the Patriot series, there was one of the books where a guy was overseas in the military. His brother was in Texas, and they promised that they would communicate if things went south, that they had a set day that they would communicate. And if you remember, he worked his way across the Atlantic by volunteering as security on somebody's private boat against pirates that took him to Mexico, to South America or Mexico. And he had to work his way up through Mexico into Texas. And at the end of the book, he shows up at his brother's wedding, right? If you remember that. Well, he was using QRP. What he was using was, it was an Altoids can that had a 9-volt battery in it, and it had a little circuit in it that he could open and close with a button. And that enabled him, and the battery created the power. And he had a line attached to it that he would just throw over a tree. And he would just touch that button and do Morse code to open and close the circuit, so that he got a dit. That's pretty ingenious, right? Just with an Altoids can, a 9-volt battery. So I am going to, let's see, QRP radio. I want to show, it's important, I want to show you guys some QRP radios. I'm going to, I'm switching my screen. There you go. Okay. These are some examples of QRP radios. Now, because they're low power doesn't mean that they're cheap. This particular radio right here will set you back about $800. And it's about the best radio you can buy, L-Craft. L-Craft is top of the line. We call it the Cadillac or the Ferrari of ham radios. These radios are so well built, you can actually get it as a kit and put it together yourself. They'll give you the instructions to do it and everything, tell you what circuit boards put inside and everything. But this is a QRP radio. QRP means that the radio should be transmitting with 5 watts or less. I believe it's 5 watts. If somebody thinks I'm wrong, please correct me. But I believe anything under 5 watts is considered QRP. Okay? Some QRP radios are handmade, are homemade. You just need a little circuit to tell you what frequency you're putting out. Your S9 is your output power, and 12.7 volts is how much you got coming in. Power coming in. That's a good example of homemade, what you would have saw in the Patriots that he had. And he had an Altoids can. There are a few here. I want to find an Altoids can for you. There's another one. So if I come up here and type Altoid, there you go. So and the reason why I'm showing this because I want you to understand that ham radio guys are some of the most creative and out-of-the-box thinkers. You remember when we first started this class, some of you may have heard me refer to ham radio guys are the guys that didn't get the girls in high school, for the most part. Not always, but they were your geeks. They were your math whizzes, guys that were good at sciences and math. They weren't exactly captain of the football team. Okay? So, and what you've got right here is, this is an Altoid can circuits that somebody made with a 9-volt battery. He's got his little button here that he uses. And when he touches both of these, he closes the circuit and creates a current across the antenna wire that gives him the dots and the dits. And you can buy these. Somebody's already made them for you. And there's the little button on the side to be able to do the Morse code. Okay. I just wanted to show you that, kind of take a little bit of just a little break outside of somebody did with a spam can. And it just, somebody did with a Star Kiss can. Yeah, TSA would, yeah. Talk about the tennis shoe bomber. Absolutely. But if you check this in down below, I don't know. Maybe it might slip by. I'm not sure. But you're right. It's not probably something I would travel with. It's something you probably want to make up on the spot. But probably on the back side of this is his antenna, jack, and somewhere in there he has to have a button. Altoids can. has a key where he puts in a paddle, what we call a paddle. A paddle would be this little wooden thing here with the disc on it. I know. It is kind of crazy though that it's that you're like, wow, really they do this, and man, they do it all the time. And you know, I've met more ham radio guys that at some point in their careers have worked at AT&T, Motorola, IBM, NCR. I mean, and they do electronics. They dabble in electronics. I mean, all these things are things back, years ago, you could just walk into your local Radio Shack and buy, right? Now you'd have to go online and order them. But the point is, yeah, man, it's kind of crazy that you can do this stuff. And some people sit here and they have different Altoids cans for different purposes. And there's a survival kit. That's what everybody should be having, is an Altoid can. It's part of their EDC. I'm sure Eric Murphy's listening to me, and if he's not, he'll be listening to this replay and be laughing. So anyways, all right, you guys get the idea. I wanted to give you just a little break from it. Let me let's get back into her. Okay, so that was an idea what QRP means. If you ever hear that term, it just means low power, using low power. Or what some people say is real power. Okay, you remember I told you about QRN and QRM? So what they are saying here is that it's QRN on this band, meaning the whole entire band is junk. However, I'm not going to dispute this, but I've always seen it being used as N was for natural and M was for man-made. However, a lot of times you can't determine which one it is. So a lot of times you will see QRM used the most. On your test, you're only going to have to deal with QRM, QSY. Okay? Now, some of your answers on there I told you were legitimate. You had QSB. That was a legitimate answer, right? Let's go back here. So QRU, QSB, right? QSL is a very common one that you'll hear. QRZ is an actual website. You can type it in, qrz.com. Very informative. In fact, qrz.com has a free testing center for you. So let me hold on here. I'm going to show you what this is, qrz.com. Okay. It tells us, we use this to tell us what our band conditions are. Okay. I can go in here and I can type in. So if I log in really quick. So I'm going to type in force. And there you go. You'll probably get a little pissed that I put his address up there, so I'm going to cover it real quick. But that gives you an idea of what his name. But you know what? I don't care if you see mine. And I just bought a house, and I already had to change the address. So my dog drinks a lot. Sorry. I thought it was a spectacular act, so I had to take a picture of him doing it. So And I've created a little profile and put little pictures in it and stuff like that. Do whatever, you know. We got a little logbook here, people that I've talked to that have, you remember I was telling you that about logbooks? When you create a contact, they put in the information, or you create the contact and then it gets sent to them and they verify it. I have a lot more than this, but these are 13 people that decided to put in my logbook. Some of these people I know personally. In this mix here, there is the founder of Amron. You guys have heard of Amron? He's in one of these 13. I just won't tell you which one. So you get the idea. But up here on resources, you can also go here and you can buy ham radio gear. Okay? You can go here and see, you know, they've got a radio for sale. All right. So what I wanted to show you was under resources, you can go to the practice exam. Now, I'm going to tell you something really quick. I'm going to take about 5 minutes and then we'll jump back. We're really towards the end of tonight, so that's why I want to give you guys just a little brain, a little break. Ask questions if you want. It's okay if you ask questions, but I wanted you guys to see this. QRZ.com. You register. You don't have to have a call sign to register for an account, but you can take a practice exam and it will just give you 35 random questions. But this is what I suggest. Go over here to study a specific subcategory, okay? And I would hit each one of these, and it will cover all of the questions that are in T1A, okay? I'm going to click on it real quick just so you can see. So I'm going to say it's C. So I'm going to click on it. And it'll tell you that it's right? And then it'll go, and now it just says 1 correct out of 26 down here on the bottom. All right. So far, I've got 100%. Which agency regulates and enforces the rules of amateur radio service in the United States? I'm going to say Homeland Security on purpose. We know that's not it. We know that it's ITU, but I'm going to click Homeland Security. Sorry, but that answer was not correct. It'll give me another chance to answer it. I'll say it's a great site to I don't know why it's not going forward, but it tells you 13 questions remaining. My point to you is, let's go back here. If you study each one of these subject matters, one of these subcategories first, you get to stay, your brain gets to stay in that area. You don't have to, right now, you don't have to worry about bugging your brain out by getting a question that the answer is QSY, and then the next one is asking you how many milliamps is a is a microamp. You know what I mean? If you just stay in this subcategory T1A, 13 or 14 of these questions are going to be just on this subject area. And keep doing them until you get 100, until you get them all right. Then do the next one, and do the next one. I know it seems like there's a lot here, but if you tackle these and you eat these in small bites, then when you come over and take this exam, your brain, you've already developed a muscle memory for every question in the question pool. You've just familiarized yourself by logic group. So when it throws you the 35 random questions, you've already put your eyes on them somewhere in here in all this list of, okay? So right now we've done 1A, B, 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 B. We are up to, I think we're up to 2B11. So 2B, we're here. Okay. We still have from 2TC all the way down to the end here. And we're going to do it because some of these are only a few questions. Okay. So QRZ.com, resources tab. You can also go to amateur radio study guides. Everything that you could want be under here. Ah, does that book look familiar? It's the book I recommended to you guys. They've got good taste. Either that or I'm a genius. I think they've got good taste. So all your different stuff here. All right, enough of that. So let's go back. All right, let's get back into it. All right. So remember QSY. Why am I switching frequencies? What signal indicates that you're changing frequencies? QSY. Well, why am I changing frequencies? ARRL does have a good practice test. I'm not going to knock them, but their study book, the actual book that you buy, it's a red cover book. I personally think that they tend to be vague and very I think they're a little too vague in their description of things, where Gordon West really keeps it simple and stupid. I mean, he really breaks it down to this lowest common denominator. ARL, I think sometimes in their study guides, they assume that you know more than you do. But ARL, yeah, I mean, the best resource in the world to go to. I'm a member, and I still go there for anything that you could want to do with ham radio. You could get in the ARRL site if you're a member. You could go there to find out where the nearest, if you go to arrl.org, you can even go and find out by your zip code where the nearest testing center is and when they're offering the next test. So QTH, you will hear a lot of times. People say, so what's your QTH? If you're talking through a frequency, you don't hear Q codes a lot. You don't hear them all the time, but you do hear them. So if somebody comes across and you don't know where he's at, he might say, where's your QTH? He knows that you're in the area, so he just wants to know around, my QTH is Wadesboro. Some of you, your QTH is Garner. Or I think somebody said Steph was in Farina Varquay or something. That would be her QTH. Your QTH can be as finite and narrow as you want it to be. Some people just give the city they're in. Some people actually give a subdivision of the city. If you know you're talking to somebody in the same city, then obviously you got to get a little bit narrow, right? So QSL, folks sometimes will say, hey, this is N4DSM, I'm in Wadesboro. QSL, it means, did you acknowledge? Did you hear me? Did you copy my last transmission? For the sake of this test, QSY and QRM are the only ones that are going to be on the test, okay, that I know of. Under what circumstances should you consider communicating via simplex rather than a repeater? So only when you have an endorsement for simplex operation. There's no such thing. You don't get an endorsement for simplex or one for repeater. Only when third-party traffic is not being passed. That's possible. I mean, What they're saying here, only when third-party traffic is not being passed. Third-party traffic would be like if you were working for Aries or emergency communications, you start getting into the MCOM aspect of ham radio, and you're passing an incident commander's commands onto another station to give to their first responders type thing. That would be third-party communications. Only if you have simplex modulation capabilities. That is the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Every radio, at its very core of what it is simplex. Simplex is just, what is it? It's just radio to radio, right? There's nothing in between you. There's no middleman. There's nothing in between you and your receiving party. So the only one, when the stations can communicate directly without using a repeater. So, yeah, Rich, that's what I was saying. The book isn't all that great. It's okay. I just think at times the ARRL study guide, I think they tend to assume that you know some things that you don't. And Gordon West, that yellow book that I recommended, he doesn't assume anything. He talks to you in the most direct and just the lowest common denominator. So everyone I read of his answers, I'm like, oh, aha. I mean, I read the technician book and the way he explains something, and I learn a different way to explain it to somebody. Back to the test, though, communicating via as a prepper. As a prepper, you always want to know the capabilities of your radio in simplex operation. Don't earn your technician license and rely on repeaters. Repeaters to ham radio is like Facebook is to the internet, or Zello is to cell phones. Okay? You can't get any more basic and more reliable than simplex. Now, I said the term reliable. Okay? Simplex is always going to work. The only factor is distance. Are you guys close enough with the power that you're using to be able to hear each other? But simplex is going to work. Okay. And as a prepper, you always at the very basic want to use simplex. And why? What are some of the advantages of using simplex? Why use a repeater and let everyone know your business? Right? When you're on simplex, somebody has to have their radio on scan, and they have to be within reception distance to be able to hear what you're saying. So you've reduced your audience, and most people, when they turn on their ham radios, they're going to turn them on to a very specific repeater that's in their area. Okay, because the problem with putting your radio on scan is that once you hit a frequency and somebody starts talking, as soon as they unkey, your radio goes back into scan mode. And while it's on the top end of its limits, somebody starts talking, it goes back around and scans at the bottom again. It doesn't catch the first part of the conversation. So scan doesn't really, a lot of people don't use the scan operation. Sometimes they do. But my point is that why let everyone hear your business? As CPN, our target is for you to be able to establish somebody, a fellow CPN member that you can get with simplex without repeater. If it's just one person, if it's more than one, great. But that you get at least one person. And then our comm plan tells you what time to turn on your radio to expect to talk to that person. And then they can turn around and have somebody other than you that they can talk to. The idea is you want to have two people ultimately on simplex as a prepper that you can talk to. Okay? Because you want to have relays. You want to have where one relay might not work, the other one will in the direction you need to go. Okay? So it's always good to have a minimum of at least 2 people that you can reach simplex. At the very minimum for CPM, we want you to have at least 1. We're targeting for 2, but we want you to at least have 1. Yeah, so what Michelle and Dave are talking about, there are free apps for your phone. The QRZ one, I just like the fact that you can hit the subcategories and just keep your brain isolated to that logic area. You know, when you get to converting megahertz to a band, you remember that 300 number I gave you? You can stay in that logic area and not worry about your brain having to scatter and over to another area of, say, go from safety to a rule. You know, just stay in the rules and master those and then go on to something else. But there are several apps that you can use. I just recommend look at the review ratings for them and try to pick the highest rated one. And they change. Some get better than others. The developer goes in and fixes bugs with them, which is why it has a low. A lot of these apps are built by ham radio clubs. So I don't have a fan of any of them. You just use one that works for you. I would download several and just find the one that works. I used them. They worked great for me. And when I went to refer them to somebody else, they were like, you know, I didn't really like that one. I like this one. So just get a feel for it. Generally, you can always get free help with tech in general, apps, study guides, or whatever. If you go for extra, typically you're going to pay a couple of dollars for help with extra because they just kind of see it as, you know, you don't need the extra. Everybody should need to get general. But nobody, you really don't need to get extra, and it's just a nice to have. So, and a lot of work goes into preparing that compared to others. So, which of the following is true of the use of single sideband voice? Remember, phone is voice of single sideband phone in amateur bands above 50 megahertz. Okay, A is say what is 50 megahertz? What band is it? How do we know what band 50 megahertz in? Remember I told you, divide 300 by the number you're given. So this would be 6 meter, right? 6 meter, if you got the tech band plan that I sent out, if you didn't, I am going to, it should see here. I'm sharing that file right now in the chat. Look around in there and you'll see technician frequency privileges. 6 meter is part of your privileges. Okay. So it is permitted only by holders of a general class or higher. That can't be right because 50 megahertz is available in text. It is permitted only on repeaters. There are 6 meter repeaters out there, but they are not very common. Okay. There are not a whole lot of them out there. As a technician, and for the purpose of this test, when you hear repeaters, you're almost always going to be looking at 2 meter or 440. Okay. It is permitted only on when power is limited to no more than 100 watts. As a technician, you are limited to 1,500 watts of power. That is the max that you can go as a technician. 1,500 watts. So the correct answer, it is permitted in at least some portion of all the amateur bands above 50 megahertz. Okay. So The fact is that voice is available on every band. Every band that we have available to us in our frequency range for amateur radio has voice on it. So the best way to remember this answer is that it is the only one that has 50 megahertz in the answer and 50 megahertz in the question. All these others are kind of reaching out, are reaching a little bit farther outside the scope of the question. And this one they tied in beautifully for you by mentioning 50 megahertz in the question and the answer. Okay? If nothing else makes sense to you, just remember that. Okay, it is exactly 10 o'clock. I'm just going to give you a little bit of an idea. So next week we're going to start on T2C. And we'll work through these will work fairly quickly. There's not a whole lot to explanation to these. So we'll zip through this section rather quick next week. I would say that by week 6, be prepared that next week and in week 6, we will start delving into the electronics part. We'll start talking about transistors and diodes and capacitors. I've got diagrams and pictures and everything for you, but just understand that, okay? And to give you an idea of some of the questions is, when do the FCC rules not apply to the operation of amateur radio? What is one way to recharge a 12-volt lead-acid station battery? A car battery is what they're saying. So, just to give you a little quick idea. Other than that, we're done for this week. I will tell you guys that if you hit me up for the link for this class and you do it within an hour or two, within an hour of the class, I probably won't respond to you. Okay? You got to remember there's over 70 of you and one of me. And every week I get quite a few people that email me at the very last minute for the link to the class. I'm not mentioning names, pointing fingers. None of that matters. I think it's an honest question, but I will say this from my point of view. If 30 people can find this class every week, something's missing if you can't. If you haven't registered for the class yet, then you didn't get the link that's been good for all these weeks. So, and I'll leave it at that. But if you ask me earlier in the day, chances are I might be able to help you. I might. Asking me anything an hour before the class isn't going to really get you a great response. I'm not being mean, but I'm in my zone. I'm trying to put my kid to bed, spend time with my wife, eat dinner, whatever, before I spend, the rest of the evening teaching. So the link seems to change every week, Dave. Dave, are you getting, and teach me, help me, because I don't get any of these things. So you're helping me. So at the end of every session, you get an email with a link to the replay, correct? That's my first question. Second question, are you getting a link each week for the next session coming up? Or are you getting a reminder email for the next session coming up? Maybe an hour before, a couple minutes before? Okay, so it's only the replay that you get after, that you're getting after each class. Are you getting a new link emailed to you for the class each week before the class starts? Right. So I have that set, I believe, to like 15 minutes before the class starts. It's supposed to email everybody that's registered. It's supposed to email you a link to the classroom. Right. Forrest, all the emails will come from Forrest. They always will. They won't come from me. And the reason why is Forrest bought the service. He subscribed to the service, so it's hard-coded with his name. All the emails will always come from him, and that's why. So, okay, yeah, you're teaching me, Dave. I really, because I'm the presenter, I don't get a replay link. I don't get a reminder. I don't get any of that stuff. I literally have to ask one of the students to send it to me so I can forward it. Got a new link this week, but that was the first time I've received that. Okay. Like I said, if you're registered, once you register for the class, everything is automated at that point. I don't do any part of it. But I will say this. I'm grateful that you guys are patient and that you're kind. This is a whole new interface. I've never taught a class online, and Forrest provided me with this service to use. He paid a lot of money for this service, several $100s, in fact. So it's a learning curve. And I'm learning every one that I do. I learn a little bit more and more. So if you remember, last week was the first week I was able to share the files that I had through the webinar. That was the first week, was last week. Cowboy says, where are all the post replays at one location? No, we are working on. So there's 3 options with the membership. One, and you have to pay. It included with the membership is the link to the replay that's stored on their servers, and that comes with the membership. You have to pay more for it to upload to a YouTube account. So if any of you have been watching on the YouTube page, the Prepping Academy YouTube page, it technically is not being stored under that page. For whatever reason, in the setup of the account, he tied that YouTube account to the webinar so that it would use that interface, but it doesn't save. My point is that we are working on trying to get these videos. I'm going to reteach this class in the fall. The reason why is we have a whole new set of test questions. Right now, it wouldn't be worth it to worry about saving these questions, because some of them are going to change come July. So, but in the fall, when we reteach it, we're going to save those. And I just had this discussion with Forrest today. We are working on trying to be able to save to our page, to Prepping Academy's YouTube account, the webinar that I'm going to do on programming your Baofeng and on programming using Chirp. We need to have something better than a replay link for those 2 goals. So it is coming, in other words. So, yep, Helen, I talked to Forrest today. He said that you were going with Bruce to take the tech, and Joe is taking the general. I'm proud, man. I'm so proud of you guys getting out there and just do it. What I want you to do, Helen, is when you come back, Helen, I want you to come back next week and do me a favor, and I want you to help motivate the students. And you know, there's no secrets to this. Tell them what you experienced and what you saw. How hard was it for you? Okay, help these folks that are not there yet, to motivate them with a firsthand account for me, if you would. That would be awesome. Because all of you that take this test and pass it, you're going to go back to your city groups, and you're going to be the catalyst that gets other people in your group to take the class in the fall or study on their own. You know, we all know how this works. A few have to go brave it out for the rest, right? You guys are braving it out for the rest of the organization. This is going to take several attempts of these classes to get our numbers up of licensed ham radio operators, but it's where we have to start. When I went to a Raleigh group, You know, there must have been 60 people in the room, and 2 or 3 people raised their hand that they had their tech license. And we just can't. We got to do better than that. You guys deserve better than that. As an organization, you know, we have to be better than that. So, with that said, cool. Yeah. So you've been using the Ham Test Prep app and taking the test about 10 times a day. That's exactly what you have to do. And it's to the point when you know that you can hit a reliably 30 out of the 35 random questions that ask you. When you can hit 30, you're good. That means you got 5 wrong, and it leaves you a margin of about 4. Because you remember, you can get 9 wrong. You got to get 26 out of the 35 right. So if you practice these tests on these apps and you're hitting reliably 30, 30, 30, 30, you're in a good sweet spot to venture out and go take that test. Remember, our last class is going to be March 13th, I believe, right before the Cape Fear test. And that night we're going to use as a review. We probably will be wrapping up just a few more questions of the test pool, but the rest of the night will be a review, especially for those that are going to go take their test at Cape Fear at Methodist University, I believe it was. So, you know, with that said, stay encouraged. I encourage every one of you, pray before you take this class and before you study with the app. Pray for discernment and for patience, and stay motivated. Know that you're doing something for yourself. When you go get this test accomplished, nobody did it but you. Don't point to me that I got it for you. You got it. You earned it. It's something that nobody else is going to own but you, because your name is literally going to be on it. So you guys, you got every, you know, I'm going to give you every tool available. I'm going to send out this week. I'm going to send out the PowerPoint presentation up to this point, and give me a day or so. Try to get that out to everyone tomorrow. I got to send it to 25. My email will only let me send to 25 people max at a time, and I've got over 75 people to send it to, because I can't pick and choose which ones, and you know. So I have to send it 3 times, and I have to add each name manually through Proton Mail. Yes, I know I could use Outlook, but for the purpose of keeping you guys anonymous, or at least a little bit more secure, I'm using an offshore email account out of Switzerland. So, yeah, that's right. In March, Charlotte will have a ham fest. You can take it there. At very worst, I'm going to do another class in the fall right before we do our fall get-together, and we are going to try to do the test at the fall get-together. The Prepalooza, or whatever we're going to call it. I don't know what name we're going to call it yet. So, all right, guys. Any questions? I'll hang on for about 5 more minutes. Any other questions, ask me. And we are good. Okay, we got 15 participants left. Ten more seconds. I'm going to cut it off. All right, guys, you have a good week. Stay positive, stay motivated, encouraged, and we'll see you guys next week.